we would, after dinner, just log into a Google Meets call and stare at each other. And we'd be like, what are we going to do? And we had 32 employees. At the time, we weren't sure if we're going to make payroll by December. We were working with our board to try to figure out what to... I'm like, this isn't happening. Like, this is not happening.
Hey, thanks for being here. My name is Leah. In this podcast, you'll get a different take on the world of founders, startups, and innovation. I was a broadcaster for 23 years, not a business exec, so it was a leap to go from TV to VC. But since I've been in this sector, I'm repeatedly amazed by the founders who put everything on the line and just start a company from nothing. Why would they do this? In this podcast, we'll find out. Joining me today is Darcy Tuer, co-founder and CEO of ZayZoon, a fintech company transforming how and when employees access their earned wages. Darcy, thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, as you know, we're in this podcast sort of exploring this idea of the founder mindset. Like, why do you guys do what you do and why do you keep doing it? So that's kind of what we're going to explore in this conversation. So why don't we go back in time? You're a multi-time founder. You started your first tech company in 2000.
In 2000, yeah. I can't believe that's 23 years ago.
Right?
If you do the math.
I'm not good at math, so there you go.
Good. You can't calculate how long that was.
No,
then,
but it sounds like a long time ago.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
It was interesting. So this was the year 2000, and I think the whole concept of founder, startup, hadn't really, that construct hadn't really existed, at least in my world and probably even in Calgary, outside of oil and gas.
Right.
But I was working in oil and gas, not coincidentally. And I remember just coming across a situation where people were doing things out in the field. And I was scratching my head. I'm like, why? Like, they're writing all this stuff down on paper and the paper's flying everywhere and there are bugs and mosquitoes. And I'm like, this is like, there's got to be a better way to capture this data in the field. And, ever since a young age, I was just a computer nerd. My parents sent me to computer camp when I think I was 6 or 7, and I just fell in love with technology. So, yeah, I was working for Enbridge Pipelines, and I saw just really an inefficient situation. I thought, well, hey, what if I were to write just a little piece of software where these guys could walk into the field with a handheld and capture the data they were collecting and get that into the office more efficiently. And so that's what I did, and that turned into my very first company. And so I didn't even think of it as an entrepreneurial pursuit. It was really, I saw a problem that I thought you could solve with technology, and I thought would be a broader problem beyond just kind of that situation I was in. And I kind of took it from there, like step by step. There was not a master plan. Right.
So when did you take that company and run with it and leave your sort of stable oil and gas job?
Yeah, well, I would say to young founders, like, your risk tolerance will never be higher than, coming out of school or starting that first job. You're not supporting a family, you probably don't have a mortgage. And so I was in the office writing this program, and my boss at Enbridge came in. I've always wanted to ask him, was he trying to get rid of me? Because he came into my office and he was like, Darcy, what you're doing, this problem you're solving for is pervasive. It's everywhere. Like, what if you took this and just sold it back to us? You could sell it to TransCanada. Me having no understanding of IP
right.
and what you give up as an employee, I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And delusions of grandeur kicked in, and I quit my job. And it was an uphill battle from there, but was something I would never regret. And I think it was just a little bit of encouragement from somebody I respected. And again, low risk tolerance. I moved into my parents' basement and started this little software company.
And it did very well.
Yeah.
And it's still doing well, isn't it?
That one was 2004. I sold that into another group. And that was 2004. And we started a company called Spirit Data.
Right.
And that company still exists.
And that one's still going. Wow. So you've done this a few times.
Yeah. I'm crazy.
What keeps you going, doing all of these things and sort of seeing these opportunities and building these solutions?
I've described this, and again, this probably dates me, but I've described this to people before. When you start your first company and you've got to figure out how to make payroll, you've got to figure out how to pay a vendor, it's all intimidating stuff. But once you start to solve for it and you kind of build a little bit of a framework, you create that invoice, you get paid for that invoice, you start to, your whole paradigm shifts. And then you tend to look out into the world and you're watching people in their jobs and all they've known is a job. They got out of school, they applied for a job, they got a job, and they're still in that job or they're in a different job. And I kind of described it as the Matrix. It's like you took I don't know if it's a blue pill or the red pill, but you unplugged from the Matrix and you're exposed, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't prescribe this to everybody. In fact, probably a smaller portion of the population. But once you see that, there's freedom in that exposure, freedom for creativity. You look at the world a little bit differently. What are things people are doing that they're just doing because they've always done it that way, and they're not challenging that, that paradigm or that status quo. And I think it gives you a different lens to see the world. And in that lens, there's opportunity.
Of course. But, a lot of people don't take that leap. You even alluded to it just there. People, it's not for everybody, right? So why, of course I have to ask the question, why would you do that? I mean, it's pretty scary to make that leap and, move back into your parents' basement and give it a go.
Well, ignorance is bliss, right?
Yes.
So, my current self, I can tell you what the odds are
right.
of success, and they're low, right? The odds are against you. You've got an 80% chance of being out of business in the first few years. But at that time, you're young, naive, you're hopeful. And I think that happens a lot. You hear a lot about young founders. I think you hear a lot more about successful founders that have done it a few times and failed and taken those lessons forward. But yeah, I think there's some naivety in there, but then you get this journey and this education as a byproduct of a pretty often exciting and arduous journey. Yeah. But you're either going to like it or you're not. And if you like it, I think you embrace that. You embrace the hurt locker, and then you continue to look for it.
The hurt locker. You embrace the hurt locker. Yeah. That is one way to put it. That's for sure. I mean, there's so many things that you do as an entrepreneur that are so challenging. I can think of any number of things, even just pitching to investors or chasing down the money or, figuring out how to grow your team. For you, in your experience, how challenging is it really to be an entrepreneur? Is it something that, well, I think you kind of said, it's not something everybody could do, but how do you keep moving forward, even though you get those setbacks that, are inevitable?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, you're faced with a problem. And that can be any number of things. Getting your first customer, finding somebody that's technical that can build out kind of the vision that you've got, getting capital, convincing your friends to tell you it's a good idea. But I think it's very reactive when you're doing this the first time. And then you get through it, you succeed or you fail. And I think this is common knowledge, but in failure, there's so much to learn. And I think back to all the failures I've had and how much value I've derived from those as I've gone on to the next thing. And as you mature as an entrepreneur, then you start to think about the journey ahead, right? So, whether it's ZayZoon and we're, 90 plus people now, or I participate in some other startups from a mentorship perspective. The thing that I always advise is think of the plan. Think of your crazy, audacious goal, right? To quote Jim Collins, big, hairy, audacious goal. Use that as an anchoring point. What does the world look like when you win? And then work your way backwards, because that's going to create this purpose. That's going to create this North Star that people can align on. And then you need to break it down. Right.
Otherwise, it'd be overwhelming, right?
It'd be overwhelming. People can't connect what I'm going to do today to that audacious goal that's set 10, 20 years in the future. So you need to really work back to, hey, and usually that's a 90-day plan, right? A quarterly plan that says, hey, we're going to do, no matter how big you are, we just went through this with ZayZoon, and we have 2 key initiatives for 90 plus people for the quarter. And then every function and every team member needs to be able to say at the end of any given week, I've quantitatively moved the company towards that or those objectives.
Right. That totally makes sense. You got to break it down so it's manageable for you even to get your head around.
Yeah, so I think my first description was you're just kind of fumbling along and you're maybe lost in the woods. And then as you mature, you can start planning. Now, no plan goes the way you expect it to, but having a plan is really important.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked a little bit about failure, but a lot of people are not comfortable with failure, right? Like that's just not an option for a lot of people. But I think, well, you alluded to this, and entrepreneurs think about this entirely differently, right? They think about failure as something that is good. It's useful. You can learn from that. Is that something that you learned later, or is that something that you figured out after you were faced with it a couple times?
I learned it later. I think that, even if you look at education, you look at how we raise our kids, you talk about success and you talk about achieving something. And I don't think we embrace failure as a society in the best way that we could, because you can be incredibly successful. You can build one company, sell it for hundreds of millions of dollars, and then think you have all the answers. And I would argue somebody that's tried to do that multiple times and failed probably has a better connection to what works or what doesn't work, right? Because you can get success bias. For me, I think what happens with failure is I correlate it to adversity, right? And so you come into adversity, your primal instinct can kick in, and it's fight or flight. And sometimes you can fight as much as you want, but you're just not going to get there. But what that failure gives you, or that friction gives you, is the ability to pivot, the ability to show a trait that I think is paramount for entrepreneurs, which is relentlessness, right? So you do need to be relentless. I've had orders of magnitude more no's in my career at ZayZoon, even specifically, than yeses, right? And you have to be used to rejection and failure, and you've got to embrace that and use it as an asset.
Okay, but that's really hard to do.
It is hard to do.
I mean, I'm thinking...
It's easy to say.
Right. But I'm thinking, you're there on a Monday and you already pitched to 3 investors. They all said no, it's a terrible idea, you're never going to succeed. I mean, how do you pull yourself out of that and then go back to your team and say, no, it's cool, we're moving forward, no big deal, just going to let that go? That's a lot harder said than done.
It is. And when I think about the hard moments as an entrepreneur and what I've done in those moments, it's typically my team in a room, me with a pen up at the whiteboard, and it's blank. I'm saying, okay, we got to start writing some things down, right? And that's all we can do. All we can do is let's write some things down that we think are going to get us move us a little bit forward. Because you think about the past, somebody told me this, I'm not sure if they probably stole it from someone, but the past is regret and the future is anxiety. So all we have is this moment right now. We're in this room. We've got a blank whiteboard, one of my favorite things. Let's just start throwing stuff at the wall. And every time we've been in that moment, first of all, as a team, you're in the trenches, and that's an incredible bonding moment. It's scary. It's raw. You want to feel alive? You're going to feel alive in that moment. And if you can navigate yourself and your team out of that, you've got something really, really unique. But all you can deal with is that moment in time, right? If you live in the past with that regret and that fear, you're going to be frozen, and that's not going to be helpful for anybody. For anybody. It does sound thrilling when you describe it like that. It is. I think you are by nature a bit of an adrenaline junkie as an entrepreneur, because it's a roller coaster. You have, and Monday you can have the highs of highs, and Tuesday the lows of lows. You think you've got it figured out, then you're like, I'm just an abject failure, all within a couple hours. No kidding. So can we get into a couple of specific examples? I know you and I talked in the pre-call about one example. Are you willing to talk about it? Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think it's so important. It had to do with the Series A round for ZayZoon around 2021. Yeah. So I'm going to share something people have told me before, and this is right, but it's also wrong, depending on how you look at it. And there's always money for good businesses. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of, as we were building ZayZoon out, it took us a while to figure out what market we wanted to go into. We're in Canada. We moved into the U.S. And we're navigating our way around, but we actually found a really nice niche in that U.S. market. And so we'd raised some capital. We'd put some of our own capital and time into the business to really try to get to that really important product market fit stage. So we got ourselves there through the ups and downs. of COVID and big government stimulus checks. And for those of you that don't know, ZayZoon is an earned wage access provider. So we give employees access to some of the money they've earned so they can pay bills, buy food, fix their car if it breaks down before their next paycheck. So we give them that liquidity on earnings so they don't get driven into a predatory loan or they don't NSF and overdraft their bank account, which really puts them into a pretty precarious financial state. So our whole model is going into the US, partnering with payroll and growing the business that way. So it started to work. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, there's going to be money for this business because we're growing 10, 12% month over month. We're on our way to 3x growth on the year, like clearly demonstrated product market fit. But what I didn't think about was by Christmas, my favorite time of the year, by the way, but by Christmas, we were going to be out of money. And I remember we were away on like early summer vacation. I got back in June and I said, okay, we're going to start fundraising. And the thing about fundraising that I would tell entrepreneurs now is the most important time to fundraise, you need two things. You want things to be going really well, and you probably don't want to be in a position where you have to fundraise, which is ironic. But if your back's up against the wall, people will smell it, right? They will smell that fear. Mm-hmm. And so I get back, I'm working with my team on fundraising. I have a bunch of institutional calls. We're running through the process, but we did not leave ourselves enough time to get that Series A round done. The market we were in, that space, that earned wage access space, hadn't really solidified as a category. So there's a timing thing in retrospect where people are saying, well, is this really a category? Like today it certainly is. But this was back summer of 2021. And it was not a defined category at that point in time. And so there was a point when I said, I would stand up at the whiteboard with my team. Well, this was COVID, so we're all at our computers. And myself, my two co-founders, Tate Hackert, Jamie Haw, we would, after dinner, just log into a Google Meets call and stare at each other. And we'd be like, what are we going to do? And we had 32 employees at the time. We weren't sure if we're going to make payroll by December. We were working with our board to try to figure out what to. And I'm like, this isn't happening. Like, this is not happening. We've got product market fit. We've got customers that are counting on our product. We've got a team that's really bought into the purpose, is aligned, is incredible. Our culture is the best culture I've ever been part of. And we, for weeks on end, we're like, okay, we talked to this VC, we got to the data room, and then nothing. We talked to these guys, we're waiting for a term sheet doesn't come. And I remember lying in bed, you're trying to figure out an angle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm running out of angles. There are no more angles. And it was hands down the most terrifying time of my career, because we had a real business. We had employees that were counting on us, customers that were counting on us. Something that I just knew made sense. And somehow we couldn't connect that to the investment community at the time.
This sounds agonizing to me, by the way. Like, I'm having an anxiety attack
worst.
just listening to it.
Yeah, I feel some anxiety right now too.
It's coming back a little bit.
I remember I'm lying in bed and my wife's asleep beside me. She knows how stressed out I am. Like, we would be at the dinner table and like I couldn't even converse. I would just stare off into space, and we can't. At the time, we couldn't talk to our staff about that because you don't want to put other people. They can't solve that problem for you in that position, right? And so it was a confidential thing to be going through. And as a co-founding team, and then certainly our board was involved, it was hands down the most stressful time for me.
Wow. So how did you move through it?
Well, it came down to that relentlessness, to be honest. And we looked at each other, and I said, it was actually early in the morning, and I got the team on the call, and I'm like, guys, we can't let this fail. We can't get investment, but we've got a community here locally that has supported us. We'd raised about $12 million locally at that time, and I said to the team, I'm like, we have to lead this round. Like, the co-founders have to lead this round. Uh-huh. But when you build a business, you've got so much risk and opportunity in that. We'd already invested in the round. We'd already put, like previous rounds, we'd already put our time in. And this is a stage where you want investors to come in and really give you that capital you need to scale up. And we're looking at each other, and I'm like, this is this is the only angle. Like, we've got to reach deep into our pockets, and we're going to ask the same of the board. We're going to ask the same of existing investors. We're not getting that institutional partner, but we can't let this thing die. And that's what we did. And we didn't have massive amounts of capital to contribute, but it was significant to us individually
of course,
and collectively. And what was interesting was, call it $1 million, right? What was interesting was we took that to market and we're like, well, if we could just raise 3, that gives us a runway to try to get that institutional investor. And we went to the market, and when people saw that we were leading that round, that the co-founders who had so much to gain in this, but were willing to price around that made sense, were willing to get into their own personal resources again to make sure this company not only survived, but that it thrived. That's what we did, and we turned that into a $12.5 million equity raise. Wow. And went fast forward from then, so we closed that January 2022, so a year and 3 months ago. We have more than quadrupled our business. We're 90 plus employees, and now we've got lots and lots of interested institutional investors. And
of course,
the beautiful thing is, like I said, business is going well, and we don't need to raise money. Now we may,
right,
because that's when you want to raise money, is when you don't have to. So
that's an incredible story. Blows my mind, not going to lie. So at that point then, do you allow yourself to take a deep breath? Do you allow yourself to go, oh, okay, we're okay now, we're good? Yeah,
like you get out of that fight or flight. Like we were definitely in fight or flight, and you need time for your parasympathetic nervous system to kick in, the one where you're you can actually breathe again and your heart rate gets a little bit lower. But it's interesting as an entrepreneur, when you raise capital, the stress of raising capital is high. But then when you take that capital on board, it's equally as high stress. It's a different kind of stress because now you need to put that money to work. You've made commitments to investors. You've told them a story. When you're raising capital, you're not raising it on what you've done. What you've done is credibility. They're investing in the story ahead of you, in what you're going to do.
Right.
And there are clear metrics and accountability woven through that story. And so then you really feel the pressure to execute. But if you've put the work in and you're being realistic about where you're going to take the business, then outside of any existential crisis, when would that ever happen, right?
Right.
Hopefully you'll be okay on the execution side of things.
Yeah. Wow. That story, and thank you for sharing that story, by the way.
Yeah, I had to get permission from my co-founders because I'm like, guys, is this something we want to share publicly? And then I thought about,
think about the resilience.
We walked into thin air today. I'm looking around at other founders. I'm like, everyone's struggling to raise capital.
Of course.
Everyone thinks they're the only ones that are getting, we went out to 75 institutional investors, and we all knows now I probably should have gone out to 105. I should have had deeper relationships with them to start with, but I didn't. Lesson learned.
Yeah. To your point, though, lesson learned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like it's this mindset. I mean, we're talking about the mindset here of this continual learning, right? It's just continual learning from the highs, from the lows, from all of it. And it never really sounds like you're in the clear. It never really sounds like that's part of the program.
Yeah, I remember listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast, and he was interviewing the CEO of Stripe, right? Arguably one of the most successful fintechs in the U.S. And he said, when did you know, you had escape velocity and you'd made it? And the CEO, I think, wisely said, I never feel that way. There are always competitors coming up. There are other things we need to think of. There are new technologies. And so I think you have to be aware that you're on a journey. It's a marathon. You don't know where the finish line is. You need to enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's tumultuous, but you do need to embrace that aspect of it. But you're doing it as a team, right? Mm-hmm. And so I get to have a significant amount of say in the people that I surround myself with.
Right.
And my co-founders have a say in that, and my executive team has a say in that. And you tend to, if you can put an incredible team together, there's no job I'd rather have than the job I have today. So I'm pretty lucky for that.
You sure are. Sounds amazing. let's talk a little bit, if you're willing, about the impact even on your personal life. I mean, I know you've got a family, I've got a family, I'm seeing these people doing this. But when you're operating with that level of stress and anxiety and the roller coaster, I mean, what's that like personally, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, it's tough. My wife and I talk about it quite a bit. So we've been married 22 years. I've got a 16-year-old son. Thank you. Happily married.
Nice.
At least I would say that. 16-year-old son, 14-year-old daughter. And in the early days, my wife was like, she would see the stress. And as I progressed in my career, she started to joke because she's got pictures of me like in random places on conference calls, like just the most random places you can imagine. We're traveling, where, it's when you're an entrepreneur, you're always on, right? Something's always happening. And she said, one skill I've learned, I think this is super important for all of you entrepreneurs listening, is the ability to compartmentalize. So I get off a stressful call and then just shut that part of my brain off and then have dinner with my family. And that's a learned skill, but it's an important skill. And so the compartmentalization is really important. And then I think what you learn is if you've got a big problem or a big fire, and then you can compartmentalize, have dinner with your family, your subconscious is still working.
Right.
It's working the problem. In fact, it might be doing a better job than your conscious because it's less emotionally compromised.
Right.
So I think that compartmentalization is really important, but it's a life that like the whole family signs up for better or for worse.
Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. Something else you and I talked a little bit about, because it's important to us at Thin Air Labs as well, is creating meaningful human impact. And I know for you, that is very motivating. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about creating that impact in the world?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, because that is my why. So when we started ZayZoon, I met Tate Hackert, my co-founder. It was his vision, and I was the entrepreneur that had made a lot of mistakes. And I'm like, let me help you avoid those mistakes. Let's make some new ones together. But at that point in time, this was 2014, I'd been on the board of Missing Children Society, became the chairman of that not-for-profit, a really important organization. It's still around today, and its mission was to basically cure the world of child abduction. And we use technology to do that. It's still a journey, but there's nothing harder than a not-for-profit. Like you say, being an entrepreneur is tough. Not-for-profit is so competitive. You're so resource constrained. There isn't a tremendous amount of talent in a pool for not-for-profit organizations. They're out making money at startups and scale-ups, right? And but there are people who are passionately driven to pursue those kinds of organizations. And really what hit me was there's an issue with sustainability with not-for-profits, but what if every business I became a part of after Missing Children Society did something good, right? Had a positive impact. So the businesses that I've founded, invested in after Missing Children Society, ZayZoon, so basically trying to cure the world of payday loans and bank fees, a clean tech fuel business called Cattell Energy, so it's reducing particulates and SOx and NOx from the environment, so purposeful. Eon Health, so health and longevity, a local clinic here in Calgary, a non-alcoholic beer company called Tuesday Brewing. These are all businesses I've invested in and helped found, and they all serve a purpose that, and my litmus test on that is it's something I'd be proud to tell my parents and my kids that we're doing this, and here's the why. And then you can rally people and capital behind that, and then you can do it in businesses that have sustainable models. So you're not running around with your hand out looking for capital. These are businesses that have exciting enterprise value, potential, generate cash flow, but also have a positive impact in some way.
Yeah. Does that impact also motivate you and keep you focused and online and keep you going when the times get really hard, like you described?
That is my motivation. So, people say, oh, do you do this so you can load up your bank account when you sell one of these things? And I would say it's like revenue. It's a byproduct. So ZayZoon this year, our end of the year goal is, well, actually, I'll talk about our hairy audacious goal. We want to save 10 million people $10 billion. And we track that. So we have a dashboard in Metabase. We look at every scrum every morning, 80 plus people, and we track those metrics. And that's what gets me out of it. Now, we get to 10 million customers and we're saving them $10 billion. We're a multi-billion-dollar organization. That's the byproduct. American Express buys us.
Right.
That's the byproduct. But to your question, I get out of bed because we're helping people put fuel in their car, food on the table, medication, right? And so that's what gets me out of bed.
You sound just like James Lockery there. That's why I get out of bed every morning.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, that's exactly what he talks about. So we've talked a little bit about impact. You also talked about hope. I know we talked about when I used to be a reporter and I would be reporting on heavy things or really hard to understand things, but I always made sure to end on my stories with some hope at the end, because I sort of find that people don't want to listen to the story unless there is some hope. But I think it also helps them remember the story and it helps them connect with the story.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about hope. How does hope play into being an entrepreneur for you?
I think hope ties back to that impact. But we think about like marketing, especially with tech companies, so important, and you go through your various personas, right? And so what is the hope of an investor? Well, they get a return on capital, but a lot of our investors they're part of the impact, right? What's the hope of our board of directors? Well, they want to get their investors a return on capital, but they want to be part of something that has meaningful impact. And me and my co-founders, our hope is that, and it's many levels. My hope is that I can be like my director, Marcos Lopez, who built Solium with his team. They monetized and they took that capital and that experience and reinvested it back into Calgary, like ZayZoon in particular, and a number of other tech companies and other causes. And so my co-founding team's hope is that we can create a story in Calgary that other founders and soon-to-be founders can aspire to. We can take what we've built and what we've gained and do what Marcos and his team did for us, which was redeploy that knowledge, that time, that capital into our community. Hope that my son and my daughter will grow up in a city that's known worldwide as a technology city. Sure, natural resource based with incredible opportunities for technology across industry, right? So yeah, hope is pervasive in everything we do. And I think if you make the narrative, you weave that into the narrative and it ties everybody in.
It sure does. It sure does. Yeah, you and I talked about that. I mean, for me, that diversification of the economy is so important. And, I've got teenagers too, and you want them to have something else to look at when it's time for them to start contributing to the economy and get their own jobs. That's, you just want some options there to give them the hope that they might be able to maybe come back to their hometown.
Yeah.
Or stay in their hometown.
Yeah, and as a parent, right, our hope is that our kids, like my son and my daughter, can say what I said earlier in the podcast, which is I couldn't imagine having another job, or I wouldn't want another job, right? I hope that my kids can find that spark and I can help them pursue that so they can get a job where they get out of bed in the morning for the why, right? And they enjoy the journey. And
they do. Maybe with less of a roller coaster ride? What do you think?
Well, it depends on what your appetite is. So I think for my son, I see that. For my daughter, she might pick something a little bit more steady.
Fair enough. It takes all kinds, right?
It does.
It takes all kinds.
Both are important, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's take a moment to reflect then. If you've got listeners listening to this, what do you really want them to understand about being a founder? What do you hope they take away from this conversation?
Yeah, that's a big question. As I look back over the 23 years as a founder, I think about, for me, I think about community. I think about the joy I have received from being a founder is that, and I think maybe my strength as a founder is I can surround myself with similar valued people, but diverse people who are attracted to creating the outcomes, right? Or can be drawn to creating the outcomes that are important, at least to me and to the people involved in the organization. And if I'm talking to founders today, I think you need to anchor on the problem you're trying to solve. And you need to really understand who you need to surround yourself with and what resources you need to be successful in the pursuit of solving that problem to the constituent base of people that are having that problem, and then really figuring out how you access that base of people, but don't make it about the outcomes. That would be my advice to myself 23 years ago. Don't make it about the financial outcomes. Make it about having impact. And I think the founders and the people that have been really successful in that pursuit, they're really focused in a very honest and sincere way on creating the outcome around the problem, not the byproduct, which is like, I'm going to be a decamillionaire or whatever, right? Like it's, that's a byproduct of, I think, really pursuing something in earnest that you're passionate about with the right team. I'd also say as a founder, find a co-founder.
Yeah.
This is not something, and certainly people have done it, but it's not something that I would want to do on my own, that's for sure.
Fair enough. Reflecting just a little bit on the Calgary ecosystem specifically and the founders here, what do you want investors to know about the founders that are building companies here in Calgary and Alberta?
So what I'm seeing in Calgary is a really special place in the world right now because, our natural resource economy is churning, right? It's doing incredibly well. You can invest in a lot of local oil and gas companies right now and get a 10 or 11% yield on your money. So that makes it difficult for us founders to raise capital when somebody can put it in a liquid capital market and get an incredible yield and the stock price still goes up. But what I can say is the future of this economy is going to be a function of, as you said, diversification, investing in technology in oil and gas and outside of oil and gas. And the people we're pumping out of schools here, SAIT's an incredible school, like Mount Royal, U of C. A lot of those students don't know what's happening in their own backyard. So that drives me bonkers. So I know when I go into those post-secondary schools and I speak to the kids, we need to get that message in to those schools. And a lot of investors are actively involved in those schools. And I think it's important that that message gets out there because as a founder, I struggle to find talent and I want to take talent and I want to indoctrinate them into our culture. Ideally for me, they're local, even though we're a remote company, having local talent, there's obviously benefit to that. We need to invest. We need to seed these local companies because you're going to get a few, unfortunately, it's not the majority, but you're going to get some of them that are going to rise and they're going to create jobs. They're going to create jobs with people paying taxes. They're going to create technology. They're going to create other entrepreneurs that will spin out and, rinse and repeat. But if we don't invest in the early days, we're not going to get the benefit 10, 20, 30 years out. So I think we need to be really deliberate. And that's what Thin Air Labs is doing. That's what Platform Calgary is doing as an ecosystem partner. And I think we need to get unified in our intent and energy in terms of creating that best outcome, right, for this local ecosystem.
That's where the storytelling comes in. We talked about that too. Like I was telling you, I worked in this city, for 20 odd years, and I didn't know anything about this ecosystem until I got into it. And it's so extraordinary and it's so exciting and there's so many opportunities. But if you simply don't know about it, you don't know about it. And that's where we have to get that narrative and the storytelling going into these schools, into these young people who they can see themselves in these opportunities. Yeah,
exactly right. It's marketing, right? But who's driving that? And that needs to be a cultural thing here in Calgary because marketing will drive the story, the narrative to the people who are saying, so what? And so the narrative to, that oil and gas tycoon that's looking to give back needs to go beyond just investing in the next oil and gas company, right? But we need to reach that person. We need to, and I think a great example is Sandy Gilbert at Intergen, right? And so they're a fund that leaned in when we needed to, when we really needed them to, and they were a big part of ZayZoon's journey. And what they're doing, connecting people, have been incredibly, like Brian Fileski, Jim Gray, and into this fund and creating that narrative. But that's just, they're doing a lot with a little. We need to get a lot of people doing the same kind of thing in the community here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked a little bit about being a founder and a lot about the mindset. But let's talk a little bit more about ZayZoon specifically. So you've talked a little bit about what it is, but where is ZayZoon at right now and where are you going?
Oh, ZayZoon is, it's an exciting time for us. So like I said, I think we're just hitting that 90 employee mark. We're on a mission to, as I said, save 10 million people $10 billion. And everyone at ZayZoon is aligned on that goal. And the neat thing about this stage of company now, as a CEO, I've been able to surround myself with an incredible marketing leader, incredible product, growth, sales, engineering, finance. And so I sit around the table with these incredible people that are aligned on values and mission, and I'm humbled. Right, because I'm the least skilled person in any of those. Like they are just incredible at what they do. And my job is really to be the coach, right? To work with the board, to work with investors, to work with the team, to align on what outcomes we're trying to create. And those outcomes are impact outcomes with a byproduct of enterprise value creation and such. So where ZayZoon's headed, we're a scale up, which means we've got product market fit. We have a strong thesis and I think a well-proven thesis around how we acquire customers, the value we get back from those customers, and the positive impact. But we're just getting started. So I think for ZayZoon as a company, we're helping people access earned wages. Our customers struggle to pay bills. Their credit ranges from 300 to 400, which is terrible. So they can't get access to the financial products that we could get access to, let's say. So we want to make sure that we can start to present them with better financial products, more impactful and flexible products that help put them in a better financial position. And so there's so many adjacent opportunities there. But as a founder, you need to be focused. So 85% of our energy goes to just getting more customers access to their earned wages, and then creating these feedback loops that give us insight into other problems we could help solve for that customer base. And when you've got people who sincerely want to help, there's a lot of curiosity there and that help inform that strategy 12 months from now, 24 months from now, around how can we help them in other ways. And so that's where we go. We want to see ZayZoon, a Calgary-based company, helping millions of employees improve their financial health, their financial outcomes, which benefits employers that are looking to recruit and retain and have a more productive workforce. So there's that kind of connective tissue between how we can help an employer by improving the financial health of their employees, which I would say are your most important asset.
Absolutely. That's so amazing. I look forward to seeing that. Darcy, thank you so much for spending some time with us here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
As a catalyst to attract investment, drive innovation, and spur digital transformation in the city, the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund is shaping Calgary's future. The fund has made a total of 25 investments over the last 5 years that are stimulating employment, strengthening our talent pipeline, and diversifying the local economy. After all, there's a reason opportunity is in its name. Discover how OSIF is helping build Calgary as a global innovation destination at opportunitycalgary.com.